Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Back to the Workplace. This webinar is a partnership with the American Institute of Architecture, New York, and a partnership between the New York City Department of Small Business Services and the American Institute of Architecture, New York. My name is William Fonkeng, and I'm an account manager with the New York City Department of Small Business Services at the Lower Manhattan Business Solutions Center. New York City Department of Small Business Services provides business support services to business owners to operate, grow, and start their businesses in New York. And as you can see on the screen, here is a different list of services we offer, from business education courses like the one you're taking advantage of today, legal assistance. We provide pro bono legal assistance, selling to government. If you're looking to increase your client base to include the government, you can attend one of our selling to government workshops and learn what it means to become a government contractor. MWBE certification. This is a minority or woman-based enterprise certification. So if you're a minority or woman-owned business and you're looking to compete for government services or market yourself as a minority or woman-owned business, this is certainly a certification you can take advantage of, and we'll be happy to assist you getting certified. If you're looking to stay connected with New York City Department of Small Business Services, as you can see on the screen, here are the different social media handles of the Department of Small Business Services. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see on the screen, but these are the different course pathways we offer. You don't need to take all these courses as you see them on the screen. So they are designed in a way where you can take any workshop depending on what is available, and take the other one and take the next workshop when it's available. So you can take them in any order.
Great, thank you. My name is Ilya Azaroff, and it's really great to be here today. I am the State Disaster Coordinator for the American Institute of Architects, and I'm a volunteer with this wonderful group. Since the COVID-19 outbreak took place, many of us gathered together and began to tackle some of the things that we are all facing. And as the AIA, we support the efforts of recovery and adaptation during not just our current crisis, but you should also know that as architects, it's our ethical charge as architects to assist after a disaster, and this circumstance is no different. Today's program, Back to the Workplace, focuses on reopening businesses, and it's one of the many efforts that's underway, and it supports our communities and businesses in partnership with the City of New York. I want to thank Andre Salori and his team for the hard work and the efforts as they continue, and we continue collectively, to rise to these challenges that are posed by our current crisis. And now on to the program with a bit of housekeeping. Next slide, please. So the information contained in this webinar is meant to serve as a helpful resource for general educational purposes only. And the contents of the webinar should not be construed as professional services or advice. Due to the rapid changing scientific, legal, and regulatory landscape related to the COVID-19 outbreak, this webinar document may at any time be out of date, and the AIA New York chapter does not guarantee its accuracy. Audience members should contact relevant government agencies and/or an attorney in your location for current laws, and consult with a licensed architect or other appropriate professionals concerning any questions regarding the subject matter of the webinar, the information contained herein, and its application to any of the specific project or other facts or circumstances. In other words, we are living this currently, and things will change rapidly. So please keep that in mind as you take on this wonderful information that we have for you today. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Andre Salori, and his team to lead you through today. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you so much, Ilya. So welcome to today's webinar, which is the first in a series that we're calling Back to the Workplace, which is dedicated to helping small businesses survive this pandemic. I'm Andre Saluri, a licensed architect and the principal of Saluri Architecture. I'm also a member of the AIA's Unified New York Taskforce, where I lead the team that has been working on this webinar for the last 6 months. So today we're going to be focusing on offices, and we have tried to make this webinar as comprehensive a resource for you as possible. As you can see from the outline, we will cover a range of issues affecting office reoccupancy, operations, and space planning. The core of this webinar are the 3 case studies, each a different type of office, where we will show you a range of simple strategies to comply with the guidelines. The main learning objectives today is to understand the key challenges affecting offices during this pandemic and how to address them using a range of simple strategies that comply with the guidelines. We would like you to recognize that there is no silver bullet to reopening and staying open during this crisis, but rather a combination of strategies. And we will show you that these strategies don't necessarily require spending a lot of money or making major changes to your office. We will also explore what we can do to learn from this pandemic to improve our workplaces in the future, while also making them more flexible to changes and more resilient to the crises like this pandemic. The key challenges affecting offices during the pandemic is that they were really not designed for social distancing. In fact, most offices are designed for the opposite of social distancing. So we want to show you how to adapt your office to meet the guidelines while also maintaining your company's culture. We'll show you why it's important to embrace distributed working and how best to communicate changes to your employees. The other key challenge is how to adapt ventilation and mechanical systems, especially if you're a tenant and don't control your system. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael Fong from the New York City Department of Small Business Services.
Thank you for the warm introduction, Andre. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody is staying safe and healthy. My name is Michael Fong. I'm the Director of Compliance and Growth on behalf of New York City Department of Small Business Services. Today, I'm here to talk about the official requirements and guidelines with respect to the business reopenings. As you can see, these are the list of the items that I would like to go over today, and I will go by one. So when it comes to business reopening, all businesses must fill out their affirmation form from their New York Forward website. The hyperlink will be provided on the chat. Make sure that as a business owner, after you fill out all the information, you click on submit, and this will complete the first step. Once you finish the first step, you may visit the New York Forward Safety Plan website. This is our 6 to 7 long document in PDF. Once you download this PDF document, make sure you fill everything out. There are different types of questions after filling. Make sure you post conspicuously where the officials can be seen. Another critical documents that businesses are required to maintain on-site will be cleaning and disinfection log. This log contains all essential information, including date, time, type of cleaning, such as regular daily cleaning, high-touch services, responsible staff for cleaning, the signature of the staff, notes such as cleaning chemical or the area, as well as manager initials. And make sure that on the form you fill out the location of your establishment. Similar to the previous form, business owners are also required to fill out their health screening review documentation for their employees. For example, date, reviewer name, reviewer signature, employee screening responses. This can be found on their website. Before your employees report to work, you may have to interview your employees' health condition by conducting their health screening. This is a sample health screening form which questions your employees' health condition for the day before they return to work. For example, first question that asks your employee if they experience any fever above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. If the answer is yes, then you may have to advise their employees to seek out for physical physician. And if the answer is no, you may proceed with the next questions. On the premise, you have to make sure that the face covering requirement poster is posted conspicuously, specifically by the front entrance door, as well as other areas where can be seen by the public. Another posting requirement is the social distancing poster. All businesses must post their face covering requirement poster conspicuously by the front entrance door as well as other areas. In addition to their poster, businesses must post the 6-foot markings by the entrance so that to further promote the social distancing for the general public. One of the most common questions coming from business owners are, how do they calculate their occupancy capacity calculations? According to the New York City Department of Buildings Building Bulletin 2020-020, it provides a way that businesses can calculate their occupancy when certificate of occupancy is not available. Simple formulas here is as follows. The first step, you have to determine the total floor area of the office, followed by subtract areas of the columns or building infrastructure. Once you have the number, you divide the total square footage by 100. Once you have that number, you round it up to the nearest whole number by going down, followed by multiply by current New York State capacity limit, which is 50%. In order to do so, you multiply by 0.5. In summary, it is square feet minus building structure divided by 100, followed by multiplied by 0.05, which gives you the total number of allowed occupants. You can also find out from the New York City Department of Building website. Every day, the COVID-19 zone map changes due to the fact that there has been increasing community transmission in certain neighborhoods. I strongly encourage all the business owners to check out the zone map by visiting nyc.gov/COVID zone. In order to find out if your business is located as an essential business, you may also visit their Empire State Development website. This gives you an idea that when your business is located in different zones, what does that mean? So in order to find out for more information regarding what related to your business during the zones, you may visit nyc.gov/COVID zone for more details. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact us through our SBS Business Restart hotline at 888-727-4692. You may also send us an email through our email address, covid19bits@sbs.nyc.gov. With that, I will pass the following session to Amy Rosen, and I will remain at the webinar to answer questions.
Thank you, Michael. And hello, everyone. My name is Amy Rosen. I am a sociospatial designer at Plastarc, and we are a social research and data analytics design consultancy here in New York, helping companies just like yourself navigate your future workplace. So on the next slide, you'll see that for us, we've been really taking into account all of the variables that need to be thought about in your future workplace model, all of which you'll hear throughout the course of this presentation and all of our case studies. It's really important that we start at number one, which is accounting for factors outside of your control, and I'll touch on why in just a moment. But I hope that at this point, despite the disruption that COVID has introduced, you see this as an opportunity to rethink your workplace. On the next slide, you'll see that really when you're thinking through what the workplace can be, there are 3 layers that you'll need to address. The first is how to optimize the current experience, recognizing that your teams and your employees are in different environments and different circumstances than perhaps they ever thought they would be. Then how can we return to the office in an efficient, effective, and equitable manner before even reconsidering telework and physical space? So I'll touch a bit on the first 2 now and maybe the third a little bit later. So thinking about optimizing the current experience, first you need to understand what can be done internally. This involves looking beyond maybe even just New York, looking abroad, looking at other cities, organizations, and what they've done that's been valuable, what they've done that maybe didn't work, and how you can start to understand what's in your control. Maybe it's not transportation or the traffic or things outside of your building. And how can you then communicate with your team in if-then responses so that they're constantly up to date, despite how fluid the situation is? When you're doing this, you can start to deploy staff surveys and hold team-based discussions to really understand the unique constraints your employees are facing. For instance, How effective do they feel they are in this new environment? Do they, for instance, have particular remote work disadvantages or spatial limitations? Or even is their emotional readiness for return not where it could be, where you can even consider bringing them back to the office? Then you can start to look inwards with your managing team and think about maybe if some workflows are more hybrid remote conducive than others. Maybe some don't need to be on site. Maybe some of the equipment and furniture you have in your office can actually be sent to their homes since they're not all being used right now. How can we think a little bit more innovatively as we're approaching the future of work? And as you're demonstrating care, it's really important to think about wellness and how to over communicate any available wellness programming and delegate with your team. This isn't all on your shoulders. In fact, this is a time where I encourage all of you to empower your employees to join you on this change management process and add a layer of care to all of your communications. And when you're adding this layer of care, think about it in terms of where you are in the crisis stage. For instance, at the top, you'll see in this resolve sector where maybe employees are feeling confused and anxious, they really need to hear facts, not speculation, and they need clear instructions. Towards the center of the crisis stage, where we're feeling a little bit more resilient, employees are still feeling uneasy and worn down, and they need clarity on long-term plans. They need positive stories and chances to connect. Right now, I would argue we're on the cusp of resilience and return and reimagination, where employees are feeling ready for change and a sense of loss. And so it's important to think about how to convey a new vision for the future and provide a chance to grieve. And then finally, as you're optimizing this experience, take the opportunity to adapt your policies in response to both teleworking and in-office needs. Improve your sick leave policies, share expectations to update managers on wellness, and if they need to participate in clean desk policies, and definitely reduce any stigmas or penalties that may be attached to quote unquote remote work. And then as you're shifting gears and returning to the office, you'll want to think through how this moment has shifted where and how different activities have started to play out. So in this graphic starts to show maybe we once thought that in-person conversations had to be in person and they had to be in close proximity, but now we see that they can be virtual. We can be on Zoom and still have the quality and effectiveness that we once thought we couldn't have. And because of this, the entire user journey has come under a microscope. And you'll really want to focus on behavioral expectations, enhanced standards, new space and equipment use modifications, and even wayfinding directionality and signage and how those play in to everything from getting from the street to your seat, all the way back out again. And as you're doing this, it's only effective if your employees know what's expected of them and know what to expect upon return. So ensure that they know the new navigational processes and procedures. Make sure you have a new communication strategy for conveying any changes to new services and spaces, and make sure they know all the distribution plans for PPE and cleaning protocols. You can start to enforce touchless doors and processing, as well as mobile wayfinding apps, for instance, to bring this to the next level. And then finally, as you're developing guidelines for modified capacities and behaviors, you'll want to not only make those guidelines and communicate those workplace behaviors, but think through how you can make it even easier for your employees to see what's available and what's not. So for instance, here you'll see utilization versus capacity, which maybe is the same as it once was, but what's changing is where and how work is being conducted. And so you can bring this all to a close by even thinking through how technology plays into this, and use things like Safe by Density's platform to show how technology and display systems can show availability and can actually do go, no-go signaling at small, low, very high density spaces like bathrooms. And now I'll pass it over to Andre to talk a little bit more about what those social distancing guidelines really need to be.
Thank you, Amy. So now I'm going to talk about the basics of social distancing and how that applies to offices and also gets into space planning. So let's start with social distancing and how we will show it during this webinar. social distancing is essentially the distance between two people. And in this webinar, we show this by using a circle, and that circle sort of emanates from that person in 6 feet. We also will shade it in a little bit just to show the potential for transmission. But one of the things that you'll notice is that there's actually a very slight halo around the edge of that circle, and that's because there really is no clear-cut boundary for the edge of potential transmission. And research has shown transmission can occur well beyond 6 feet. So we take that into account with the graphics. The other thing that we're doing here is that we're showing a small circle at the middle of our social distancing circle. And this is what we're calling the personal space. And the reason for that is because as people, we're not stationary objects. We move, we have a range of motion. And if our goal is to measure the distance between people, we have to take into account the person's body so that we're really measuring from the edge of them or the edge of the range of their movements. So when you start to have two people, you can see here that when they're far apart, those circles don't intersect. But as they get closer, it's fine. We're still maintaining the correct distance, and it only really becomes an issue when this social distancing circle starts to overlap the personal space of another person, as you can see here where we're highlighting it. And that's because you then have a greater risk of transmission according to the guidelines. So one thing I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of is that there are a number of different ways of showing this that are out there, and some of them are not really correct. So one of the things that we've seen is that the social distancing circle is measured from the center line of a person. And the problem with that is that that doesn't take into account sort of your body and the distance that your body takes up. So even though it may appear to be safe, you actually in fact may not be. As you can see here, this is showing that you're only 4 feet apart, but it would actually be 6 feet. To make matters even worse, we've seen drawings and diagrams that show the social distancing circle as a 6-foot circle, which means it's a 6-foot diameter. So, this looks fine according to this diagram, but if you actually look at the dimensions, you'll see that you are well below 6 feet and that you would in fact be invading the personal space of that person. So please be aware of this when you're looking at these things and if you're trying to do any space planning or talking to your colleagues or staff about social distancing. Now, in an office, the same principles apply. So if you're sitting at a desk, you still have your social distancing circle and you still have the personal space, except this time it's just under your seat. So whether you're standing or sitting, it's the same issues, the same principles. And when someone starts to walk through a space, these things really then start to come into play. So it's only an issue at the moment when the social distancing circle starts to overlap the personal space. And when you look at it from the top, you can see that a little clearer, that even though this person is standing several feet away from the desk, their 6-foot circle is still overlapping the personal space of that person. Now, these issues sort of just become exacerbated when we're in an office environment. So if you look at a typical desk, when you start to get into a regular office, desks tend to be face-to-face. So as you can see, there is almost no way to properly social distance in a typical office desk arrangement. And these issues just continue to be exacerbated as you start to layer up the desks and start to cluster them together into very typical configurations like 6-packs or 8-packs. And then to make matters even worse, in a lot of offices, you then have groups of these clusters in an office, and typically they're separated by 6, 7, 8 feet, and that density just starts to increase. Now, in that space, you also typically have that as your walking aisle. So someone will walk through that, and again, you can see that there is almost no way to properly social distance in this type of configuration. And this is actually why the guidelines now require that you wear a mask when you're walking around an office, because the only way that you could, you wouldn't necessarily need a mask is if these desks were 16 feet apart. And I don't know of any offices that are like that, and most offices don't have this kind of space. And this is precisely why the guidelines actually require you to wear a mask if you're walking around. So with that, I would like to introduce Stephen Sawar from Solari Architecture to talk about our first case study.
Thank you, Andre. I'm Stephen Sawar with Solari Architecture. This case study is the largest office size we will discuss for a typical small business in these case studies. Company X averages about 40 employees on a regular basis. Company X is a New York City sales and marketing firm which utilizes this 4,200 square foot office to accomplish a variety of objectives. Now, we've made up this case study for Company X to show the typical office conditions in New York City and convey the various ways Company X can address its office's current layout. The office manages to meet the needs of the executives, salespeople, marketing team, and support staff, which are typically on the phones, sending emails, and meeting with clients face to face. Each sector of the office has been set up for specific teams to be able to allow for the company to work individually or within small groups. Like many typical small businesses in New York City, maximizing the use of this office space requires Company X to organize its office as a large open space plan with your typical employee workstations and standard 5-foot work desks. Numerous file cabinets can be seen which house important information for clients and project information on paper, as well as the archives for older files that they currently heavily rely on. The receptionist greets the employees and clients as they enter the space with an open reception and waiting area. Company X is able to efficiently meet the needs of its employees as well as allow for clients to wait comfortably until they're ready to be seen. Very similar to many New York City offices, this office has a private staff pantry, a conference room large enough to hold meetings, and 2 small meeting rooms. Lastly, there are 3 private offices that are typically occupied by executives most of the time. Now, in March of 2020, we were all shocked by the news of COVID-19. Now, what we see here is the same Company X office case study at full capacity with the 6-foot social distance circles overlaid. I know this may look a bit extreme, but it's intended to highlight the areas in which an individual's 6-foot social distance circle overlaps with another individual's personal space, which is a smaller circle Andre mentioned earlier, thus creating a danger zone and increased exposure if someone was to be diagnosed with COVID-19. Specific areas like the large conference room, small meeting rooms, and staff pantry area don't allow for employees or clients to properly distance themselves and avoid exposure, showing that small enclosed rooms creates increased exposure to transmission. As you can see from the slide, there are a variety of areas where Company X's existing working conditions are problematic during a time like this pandemic. With the need to shut down all non-essential operations, Company X quickly shifted to a fully remote, distributed workforce. Thankfully, in the intermediate, everyone works remotely with varying degrees of fulfillment and efficiency. But in June, during phase 2 of the New York reopening plan, as offices were allowed to open with 50% capacity and social distancing, Company X began reviewing various strategies to reoccupy this office. Now that we've acknowledged the issues and challenges that the pre-COVID work setup creates during a situation like COVID-19, this case study will follow the process Company X is taking to reopen. I'd like to introduce Phoebe Park-Kincaid, certified interior designer, who will address the various strategies for how to help Company X reopen.
Thank you so much, Stephen. My name is Phoebe Park-Kincaid. I am a certified interior designer in New York, specializing in corporate interior spaces. As Stephen mentioned, the latest guidelines allow for offices to open at 50% capacity with social distancing protocols in place. Based on that, we'll consider strategies to accommodate about 20 people, so half of the 40-person workforce at Company X. First, we'll look at making only very minimal physical changes, and then investigate some options to reconfigure the workstations in the open area and look at the pros and cons of each approach. So let's dive right in. Minimal physical changes. As you can see, the floor plan is pretty much the same. The strategy here is to implement a seating arrangement that meets the 6-foot social distancing guidelines. placing 2 employees per cluster facing in the same direction with an empty desk between, seating 1 employee in each of the private offices and small meeting rooms, and a maximum of 2 employees in the larger meeting room. In addition, they'll create 2 teams of 19 to 20 people each and rotate on a weekly basis. There's no overlap between Team A and Team B, which limits possible transmission between teams should there be a COVID case, and implement deep cleaning protocols between teams. So you can see there's no overlap of occupied spaces in Team A and in Team B. In addition, they look to control traffic flow using one-way floor markings such as decals or tape, and plan to display signage at the entry doors and throughout the space to reinforce protocols, including a strict mask policy. Some areas of the office would need a bit more modification. At the reception area, they plan to create a zone for PPE, hand sanitizing, and temperature checks. In this case, a small table serves this purpose and helps direct the one-way traffic flow. They also plan to add plexiglass screens to the reception desk, since this is a high traffic area and the job function requires that face-to-face interaction. Additionally, they plan to remove lounge seating to prevent clustering and open up floor space for social distancing, and to repurpose the coat closet to receive and sanitize deliveries. In the open plan, the company looked to implement a clean desk policy. No personal items may be left behind on desks to allow for deep cleaning. Plants at file banks to discourage clutter and limit face-to-face interactions, and sanitizing stations conveniently located throughout the space. The pantry is another area where some modification is needed. They plan to limit the pantry to single occupancy, remove table and chairs to discourage gatherings, and enforce cleaning protocols for high touch points, as well as discontinue use of equipment such as ice machines and coffee pots that may harbor virus. In meeting rooms, limit occupancy by removing chairs. Consider repurposing larger meeting rooms to workspace for 2 persons maximum. And portable HEPA filters may help in closed spaces like this. Small meeting rooms become single occupancy workspace. While this meets social distancing guidelines, it may still be best to avoid more than 1 person in enclosed spaces, like the larger meeting room, for any significant length of time. So let's look at the pros and cons of this strategy. The pros are it's low cost, can be quickly implemented with minimal time and effort. There are no costs to reverse changes post-COVID or if guidelines should evolve. And there are 2 teams, so if there is a COVID case, only 50% of the employees are potentially exposed. The cons are all meeting spaces are occupied, leaving no breakout spaces. The open plan becomes noisy as people collaborate with remote workers and clients. And it doesn't fully embrace the sentiment of distributed work. In-person collaboration is pretty difficult, and it's a rigid plan with no options, choice, or flexibility for the employees. So let's move on to scheme 2, where we'll look at some ways to reconfigure the desks and add screens and other dividers in the open plan. In this version, the company looks at the possibility of reconfiguring the desks by separating the clusters to create more space between occupants in the open floor plan. Again, they would implement an assigned seating arrangement similar to scheme 1, but now allowing 3 employees per cluster. Besides separation, adding screens between desks may provide some additional mitigation of large droplets, but not of aerosols. There may be some locations where screens make sense, like at the reception desk, but in general, the thoughts are, taller is better, being cleanable and wipeable is important, but in reality, they're essentially big sneeze guards. Another option is to add vertical storage cabinets between workstations, which, much like screens, may provide some mitigation against droplets. The pros are this provides a greater distance between desks for more seating in the open area, freeing up the meeting space. Screens and vertical storage may provide some additional mitigation, as well as a psychological comfort. Added storage provides space for personal belongings, supporting a clean desk policy. But the cons are much higher initial costs for product and labor. Power and data may need to be rerouted at an additional expense. Adding physical barriers can hinder natural collaboration. And there is a huge environmental impact of temporary screens. They are really wasteful. Screens and barriers may only provide the perception of safety or a false sense of security, as they've been shown to be ineffective in many cases. Which brings us to now, nearly a year into the pandemic, with a vaccine on the horizon. After investigating their options and weighing the pros and cons of each, Company X decides to keep it simple and play it safe. The reality is, most employees are successfully working from home, with only a few employees actually needing to come into the office. Actual occupancy will be far below 50%. No need to spend time and money during this crisis to reconfigure desks, and any future renovations should focus on distributed working and flexibility. So here are the strategies they employed. They embraced a nuanced approach that does not strive for 50% occupancy. As I said, most people are working successfully from home, requiring only a few key people to be in the office. Like maybe IT needs to come in and upgrade technology, or the HR manager needs some sensitive files that are kept on site. Maybe the CEO just really needs to get out of the house. But they also implement some simple low-cost strategies presented in Scheme 1, such as the PPE and sanitizing stations, floor decals, and signage. And they utilize scheduling and screening apps to coordinate who comes in and when. They schedule the office to be closed on Fridays for deep cleaning. And they really support employees working from home by providing improved technology and a stipend for home office equipment, such as ergonomic furniture, noise-canceling headphones, and upgraded Wi-Fi connections. So with the company's immediate operational needs met, they begin to look ahead to the future. While everything is still in flux, it's clear the workplace will be forever changed. Work from home has been more successful than anticipated, and it's taught us a lot about what's really needed for businesses to thrive and for employees to be happy and productive. So this begs the question, if work can be done from home, are offices even necessary? And sometimes not, but mostly yes. But they can't be the same densely packed, inflexible sea of workstations that's become de rigueur. The offices will have to be special. Offices will be a place that reflects company's culture and values. Distributed working is here to stay. Most people are interested in continuing some degree of work from home, even after the pandemic, and the new office space must support that. Study shows that people are also missing the social aspects of the offices. The water cooler chats and spontaneous collaborations are really essential. Above all, flexibility is key, both to respond to the next pandemic, God forbid, or to respond to fluctuating employment levels. It's our responsibility to learn from this and to create offices that support the new way of working. The reimagined office is highly flexible to respond to anything. It provides different ways to work, allowing employees more freedom to choose what works for them. Ergonomic desks, hoteling, and work lounge settings. A redesigned reception area adds a logo wall that separates the open workspace from common space. The waiting lounge is combined with the new open pantry to allow casual meetings and flexible workspace. A continuous run of desking located along windows allows for maximum flexibility. Employees can be spaced out as far or as close as needed by shifting movable screens. This can be done quickly and easily. A dedicated wellness room supports the company's focus on employee health and well-being. File banks are converted to personal lockers as paper files are eliminated in favor of digital filing, and the tops of those locker banks double as hoteling space. Furniture with a center spine carrying robust power and data allows for fluctuations in density. Flexible furniture supports generous spacing, and since all the power and data is located in the center spine, it can be dense packed as needed just by adding more desks. There are a variety of informal work, meeting, and breakout spaces. Multifunctional lounge spaces with a variety of furniture support individual work and collaboration. This is where that informal information sharing can happen organically. Hoteling spaces further increase capacity. Private offices double as meeting space. Sightline tables with TV screens support distributed work by giving everyone a seat at the table, virtual or in person. Flexible meeting space with movable walls can be opened up for larger meetings. It's all about flexibility here. Lounge conference rooms support both in-person and video meetings. Again, really supporting distributed work, bringing everyone together wherever they may be. And finally, this animation shows the flexibility of the reimagined office through various levels of density and illustrates how thoughtful design makes it easy to adapt to change. And now I'd like to introduce Yutaka Takiura, architect based in New York and professor at Pratt and in Osaka, Japan.
Thank you, Phoebe. Hello, everyone. My name is Yutaka Takiura. I'm a principal architect with TDA and a professor at Pratt Institute, as well as Osaka Institute of Technology. Now, we will discuss a case study of a small sharing office in New York City. We see many startups, small business, or sole practitioners use this kind of space. This office example is about 1,200 square feet in a typical loft building in Soho, Manhattan. The building is over 100 years old, 5-story high, walk up, and it has an old and very slow elevator, freight elevator, outside of this space. This office suite has a bathroom, kitchenette, and a sharing conference room. We have a sitting area in front, very front of the office space. We can have a quick meeting there, or we can walk up there and work on laptops there. Sometimes we need to stand up and walk around. Yes, these days it's a problem. Early 2020, 4 groups shared this office. They are architects, graphic designers, film animators, and event planners. It was a very comfortable and creative environment thanks to the open space. After March 2020, the office has been closed. Due to the nature of space sharing, it is not easy to control who comes to work, when, and how. This space does not have many windows. Split type air conditioners are located above each group on one side of the space. So my story was about the existing condition, a pre-pandemic condition of the sharing office space. Next, Jun Yang, architect and educator, will share and discuss design options to help the situation.
Thank you, Yutaka. Hi, my name is Jun Yang, principal at Habitat Workshop, an architecture and urban design office. As we start considering how to adapt this shared office to current guidelines and social distancing requirements, the small space and dense workstation configuration of this pre-COVID layout makes meeting the requirements difficult, as you can see in this plan with the social distancing circles shown. As we saw in the previous case study, the most severe situations are in small rooms with high occupancy, like the shared conference room on the upper right corner and the enclosed office on the bottom right. As we look at possible schemes for adapting to the current guidelines, the biggest challenge of this shared office is creating a reasonable separation between the different companies while also limiting the use of the shared spaces. Other key point to consider is that the large open space relies on only one window, but luckily, a relatively high ceiling at 12 to 13 feet helps with air circulation. Another key point is the 4 individually wall-mounted HVAC units. As an immediate strategy, our first scheme shows how the office can operate at 50% occupancy with minimal adjustments to the existing layout. This scheme reduces density by increasing distance between seats, complying with the recommended social distancing guidelines. This accommodates 3 companies. The conference room at the top right can be reconfigured into a private office space for the interior architecture company. The density of the open workstation area is reduced by pushing desks away from each other. And we have temporarily eliminated the waiting area, material library, and counter space next to a small pantry to limit the use of shared space. The biggest advantage of the scheme is its minimal cost and effort because all we're really doing is moving furniture around. However, at 50% occupancy, the office can only accommodate 3 companies and a total of 5 people. This is a problem because it does not include the 4th company. These next few slides illustrate some of the strategies that apply to all schemes. The first strategy removes the shared waiting area and creates a centralized delivery drop-off and sanitizing station near the entry. Secondly, workstations are rearranged to meet social distancing guidelines and to reduce density. In addition, the shared shelving and counter next to a shared pantry is dismantled and separated for each company. In Scheme 2, we're accommodating the fourth company while still complying with the guidelines. To fit the fourth company back in, we divide the open workspace into two smaller areas. This division can be done with the use of partial height panels or furniture. In this example, we're using bookshelves to divide the space. This is still reasonable in its cost and efforts, and the ability to accommodate 4 companies and 6 people is hugely beneficial. Although these elements do not have to span a full height, in this case, they're 8 feet high within a 12 to 13 feet loft space, the overall natural light would be a bit reduced in the divided open workstation area. We should also recognize that the scheme does not completely block the movement of aerosols. The same division could be achieved with a more permanent materials and construction. In Scheme 3, we're showing full height walls and doors, and this strategy provides complete separation between the companies and minimizes aerosol movements between the companies and the shared spaces. However, the problem here is no natural light and ventilation into the newly divided spaces. This scheme also requires building permits, which means you need a licensed engineer or an architect to file plans with the building department. Compliance with ADA accessibility and building codes is required because these are permanent changes. Considering these requirements and the construction cost, the overall cost and efforts for the scheme is much greater than the previous schemes. After evaluating the pros and cons of each scheme, we decided Scheme 2 was the best because it accommodates 4 companies with the least cost and effort. Here is a view of what this selected scheme could look like. It is important to remember that the scheme does not completely block aerosols above the partial height dividers. Even after selecting Scheme 2 as our preferred strategy, we realized it still has many problems, but these problems are coming from the original existing conditions and layout. For example, most windows are in private rooms, and the open space where most people are relies on a single window. The layout also lacks flexibility for meeting spaces and fluctuating company sizes. The only way to fix these problems is to renovate the office. Here, we are reimagining it with greater flexibility and better distribution of natural light and ventilation. And as you can see here, we have put the open workstations along the perimeter and have designed a central core dedicated to meeting spaces, phone booths, and lounge areas. This scheme is easily adaptable to meet the social distancing guidelines by reconfiguring shared spaces into private offices. It can accommodate up to 9 people with social distancing, which is more than any other schemes we've reviewed. One of the benefits of renovating is this flexibility that can also help with other changes like fluctuating economy and company sizes. These 3D views show that the central core does not go all the way up to the ceiling for better natural light and ventilation from the windows. The workstations are located along the perimeter with wall shelving above. And on each end of the central core, you can see an open shared space for informal working or meeting that further helps with flexibility and sharing the natural light and ventilation more democratically. Now, Andres Soluri will discuss a case study example that already practices the discussed key strategies.
Thank you very much, June. So I'm just going to spend 2 minutes to show you this very quick case study, which is a 5-person office that's about 900 square feet. It's actually the office of Slurry Architecture, And as you can see here, it's a very open studio space. We have a row of workstations along the window, and the space is divided by these workstations. We also have an open meeting room, open meeting space, as well as a small mini pantry in the corner. There are a lot of windows in the space, and all the bathrooms are in the hallway. So when the pandemic hit in March, we decided to work from home initially. And once we were allowed to begin coming back to the office, we realized that there were a number of social distancing issues, as you can see here, even though we have a fairly spacious office. So what ended up happening is that some of our staff decided to work from home for the duration of the pandemic. And what that did is it gave us the opportunity to just slightly move some of the computer terminals really just a couple of feet in order to achieve proper social distancing. So that then allowed the remaining staff to come into the office intermittently as needed. So we also implemented just a number of the strategies that were talked about in the prior case studies. And those include bringing in a portable HEPA filter. This was actually given to us during Hurricane Sandy. We set up a sanitizing station, and this includes not only the sanitizing materials, but it also has the temperature gun and the sign-up sheet and health questionnaire that is required. And we combine that all into a single document where every staff member will just sign themselves in and take their own temperature. We also set up the required posters. We put them on the front door so that they were obvious as required. And we also posted our New York State safety plan on that front door so it was easily visible. And on the bottom right, you can just see we have an area for boxes and water bottles and things that come in for sanitation. And then finally, you know, we keep our windows open. So when the weather is cold, like it is today, we just keep it open a crack, and we try to keep two open for cross ventilation. So I hope you can see with just these couple of simple strategies, we were able to comply with the guidelines without any significant work, without significant effort. It took only about 10, 15 minutes to move the computers, but this is really sort of the bare bones of what it needs to comply with the guidelines. So with that, I would like to introduce Cam Nassiri from Stantec, who will talk to us about ventilation and HVAC.
Thank you, Andre. My name is Cam Nassiri. I'm a principal with Stantec's Buildings Design Group in New York City. Today, we're going to talk about the role of HVAC and fight against COVID. We will discuss short and long-term strategies and measures which may be applied to the existing or the new systems to minimize the spread of COVID-19 virus. In all cases, I do suggest that you always contact a design professional to make sure that the proposed measures are effective and useful for the buildings that you're in. To begin with, we know in the past we used to design our buildings with architects to be a protective structure, a place that people do their business. Then we became very energy efficient at it because we had to. Price of energy was high. We were trying to reduce the cost to businesses. And now we're also dealing with the health issues, especially the pandemic. So having that in mind, we're going to move to the next steps. So in order to really make our work environment safe, there needs to be a process. And that starts really with the condition assessment of what we have. What did we have in place before the shutdown of this COVID-19? Taking operational assessments into the existing systems. Is there anything or none? Are our systems working or not? Look at our ventilation system and in fact, test the ventilation system to ensure that we have adequate ventilation that meets not only the code and also what's required now to fight the virus. And then identify ways to improve our building and our work environment, document it, and start having a mitigation plan for it. Some of the low cost or short-term measures are really easy and especially applies for the small business. Increase airflow. Make sure that we bring as much outside air as possible. If we had an air conditioning unit, that's one possibility to make sure the dampers are open, dilute as much as we can the outside air. And if we don't have any, simply when we can, open some of the windows and the doors that open externally to our space, just to ensure we get additional ventilation in our space. Operate our air conditioning units, no matter how small they are, more often. Have them start earlier in the day, finish later in the day. This allows more circulation of the air and also additional ventilation. Sanitize the existing ductwork. There are all kinds of aerosols that we can spray, or we can use UV lights for the same purpose. Make sure all the potential air restrictions are removed. That means the dampers are fully open, the air outlets are doing their job. As Andre mentioned, we could also purchase small portable air purifiers with HEPA filters. They are not very expensive and they're available almost anywhere. We can talk about sizing of them later on. And then also make sure that in the smaller office spaces, personal fans are removed because that may allow air circulation from one person's personal space to another person. For the long-term measures, which will require some sort of capital investment, we have 5 measures, which are really the best bang for the buck we can get. Measure number 1, which will be the next slide, is basically to increase our ventilation and flush the pathogen out of our space. This is done by basically allowing mechanical ventilation to bring outside air, to dilute our air, and making sure that air is not stagnant. Now, in spaces where you may have an air conditioning unit, typically New York City code requires us to have outside air. So by ensuring that outside air dampers are operable, they can bring the maximum possible into our space. And again, retro commission the existing would allow us to achieve that purpose. Step number 2, or measure number 2, is to look for trapping the pathogens. That would be better filters, replacing the existing filters. So you can see there's a table on the screen that shows filters from grade 1, which is MERV 1 to MERV 20. As you go down the table, you can see things become more serious, like HEPA filters. Well, we don't suggest HEPA filters because they're expensive. They create a lot of resistance in front of the fans and may not be suitable for most applications. However, we do recommend MERV filters such as MERV 13 filters. They happen to be offering you the best 90% efficiency, and they capture a good amount of contaminants. However, they would not be capturing COVID-19 virus. But I'll tell you what we do to improve the situation. Again, if you look at the next item, which is really use of ultraviolet irradiations to kill pathogens, these are basically lamps. We have had these for a long time. They are proven to kill the virus as we expose them. So basically, UVGI, they use short wavelength UV lights. Once we slow down the air and we expose the virus to about 10 seconds of exposure, we tend to basically deactivate the virus and kill it. So this has been proven. We obviously want to put these lamps inside of our ductwork or plenums or the air handlers if possible. We do not like to have them exposed because they can cause damage to people, skin especially, finishes, and eyes. So we like to hide them in spaces such as ductwork, and they are proven to actually be very useful. In addition, there's another advantage, by the way. If you do install these lamps, because they kill the pathogens and all kind of contaminants, you keep the coils and filters cleaner. Therefore, you have less resistance against your fan system and use of chilled water, for instance, and that decreases your operational costs. Number 4 is basically installing something called a bipolar ionization. By no means is a new system, and is not going to kill COVID-19. However, if we use this system in addition to MERV 13 filters in our air handlers, we greatly improve quality of air, of the indoor air. So on the screen on the lower left-hand side, you would see these ion tubes. What they do basically, they generate positive and negative ions. This, the picture right above it, the diagram shows air comes in from the left side within the ductwork, and we ionize that air. Once we do that, we tend to have these positive and negative ions to cling themselves into smoke, VOCs, anything that is airborne within our airstream. That could be viruses and bacteria as well. Once we do that, these systems, these particles tend to become larger, become bigger clusters. Some of them simply fall out of the airstream, and some are captured back to our air handler, back to our filter, MERV 13 filter, where now because these particles are larger, they can be more effectively captured. So this is a sort of an inexpensive thing. You can see those tubes, you place them at the inlet to the air handler typically. They require some sort of power, and a professional needs to help you to size the proper basically equipment for you. It also keeps the filters working longer and more effectively, by the way. There is a drawback on this thing. These equipment do produce ozone, O3 molecules. So there's a little bit of setback. However, as we're fighting the virus, again, this is a very effective way to fight the virus. It also eliminates, by the way, that's another thing, it eliminates strong odors. So if you happen to be a business that takes a lot of air from the outside and you may have a pizza shop right under your establishment, well, this is actually going to help you to remove those odors. And our last very effective improvement would be to add humidifiers. So we know indoor humidity in the wintertime is a big challenge. Typically outside air gets very dry. So we like to suppress the pathogens with increasing humidity. It's been proven in the laboratory, and the evidence shows that if we increase the indoor humidity, and we can go to the next slide to talk about, well, if you go back, I'm sorry. What you see on the screen, you can see a slide of a map of humidity from 40 to 60%. This happens to be the influenza virus. You can see how low it becomes because we stopping and we deactivating the virus in its track. And if we move to the next slide, it's even a more comprehensive approach. Again, this has been some studies that has been done by CDC, and they have shown the orange curve. It shows basically respiratory viruses that are airborne could also be decreased if we can obtain humidifiers that keep our interior space between 40 to 60% relative humidity. Now, it is a tough thing to do, as I said, because some of the buildings happen to be older, and as they're older, let's say they're single layer glass or not enough insulation in the wall, we could form condensation. But that's something that, again, we need to be looking at it with a design professional as this gets implemented. And if you go to the next slide, basically this shows you 3 steps in which the virus gets transmitted. First is somebody that gets into the space. They may be infected, they may know it, they may not know it, but then there is a virus transmission stage. And that's where we like to use our filtration. We like to use our UBGI. We like to use our 5 top-rated measures to slow down or eliminate that transmission as much as possible. And then by adding those measures, we also increase immunity of our people. For instance, more humidity, typically people feel better. better filtration keeps people healthier. So we can't do much about I don't want the behaviors, but what we can do, we could clean the indoor air, stop the virus from transmitting, and keep the spaces clean. By doing so, step 2 and 3, as shown on this diagram, we could actually fight the virus very effectively. And at the end, it's not all about HVAC. We only touched upon very basic issues. We could have gone in a lot more in depth. However, as we do the HVAC, we improve our HVAC and ventilation. We also need to understand we still need to do the cleaning. We need to look at our operational plans. We need to have a risk assessment and work these with the other options as proposed by our architects in this seminar to make sure we have a safe working environment. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy. She's going to talk about flexibility and change management.
Thank you so much, Cam. That was fantastic. And I'm just here to really bring us kind of back to people a little bit. Phoebe, June, and others throughout the case studies clearly illustrated how important flexibility is to the future of work. And at the core of many of the case studies you've just seen was an emphasis on reconsidering telework and physical space. Because of this forced period of distributed work, there's been a unique shift in perspective. Perhaps you didn't think you could go digital, and now you see the value. You recognize that maybe you don't need to commute for an hour to the office and back, and maybe you like having your dog on your lap as opposed to on a frame in your desk. And because of this, people are changing their perspective. And we decided to actually survey a bunch of attendees throughout our webinars throughout this year. And we noticed that there's been a dramatic shift. I apologize for the type here, but what you see is 0.9 days per week is what we heard was really how frequently people were working out of the office pre-COVID. Going forward, we're hearing an anticipated desire for on average 2.7 days per week. That is a huge change, and it warrants change management. That means that over half of the week, people want to be remote. And in fact, beyond that, what we noticed was that those that were reporting a desire for telework, if you shift to the next slide, you'll see that this desire persists, especially among those previously unfamiliar with telework. So this is particularly important to keep in mind as you're thinking about ways to connect. And when we surveyed about what was driving a demand for returning to the office, really what it came down to was culture, staying engaged, being able to cross-functionally collaborate across teams. And so we need to think about how to creatively bridge those gaps despite location. As you see less people coming into the office, you might also need to evaluate your readiness for shared desking. A few of the case studies talked about sharing your space and how fruitful this can be, not only to cost saving, but also to the equipment and planning that you need to think about. And then on the policy side of things, think about how to maybe develop new protocols that consider a telework first approach. Think about those that are not in the office as your primary audience, and I promise it will go far in terms of transforming the way you treat this moment. And maybe even investigate new training models that really require a new set of skills that need to be nurtured. How can we think about long-term teleworking in this fashion? And if I haven't said it enough, you need to show care by communicating with your team at all stages of the process. Make sure that everyone receives the same communication, regardless of where they are working. Make sure that everyone knows that these new telework training models are available and that they know that they can choose to work remotely if they have any legal, privacy, or wellness concerns about returning. All in all, in conclusion, think about ways to distribute work, culture, and relationships, as this is fervently shown to be the #1 most important aspect of the workplace. And don't forget what you've learned over the last few months. Because of this forced telework experiment, you've recognized how valuable boundaries are, and you've investigated new ways to connect creatively as a team. You've maybe gotten outdoors and stayed social. But at the foundation of all of this is really this elevated importance of taking breaks and recognizing our health, both physical and mental. And so now I'll hand it back to Andre to bring us to a close.
Thank you, Amy. So I think as we conclude our webinar here, it's important to acknowledge that even with the vaccine approvals imminent and distribution hopefully starting in the next few days or weeks, that these strategies are still important because it may take many months for everyone to be vaccinated, and there will be a long period of time where we'll have to maintain the same protocols and strategies. So the main conclusions we'd like to leave you with is to really keep things simple. You don't have to spend a lot of time or money to make major changes to your workplace in order to comply with these guidelines, and there's no silver bullet, but rather there is a combination of strategies that are needed. It's important to clearly communicate and listen to your employees and to make decisions based on maintaining your company culture. And finally, as many of the panelists have said today, offices may never go back to the way that they were. While this has been a difficult year, we believe that this could be an inflection point, a unique opportunity to improve our workplaces by making them more democratic and healthier places to be. An opportunity to introduce choice for different ways of working and to embrace and enhance distributed working. And ultimately, we believe flexibility is key to navigating this crisis and the many other challenges that small business regularly deal with. So the next steps is that SBS will email all of you a copy of this webinar as a PDF. If you have questions or questions about requirements and guidelines, you can call the SBS hotline. There are also lots of online resources. If you need to make changes and you have funds and resources available, we recommend that you hire a licensed architect, engineer, or interior designer to help you with that. If you do not have funds and you need to make changes, there are two organizations that you can reach out to. The first is the Design Advocates, which is a network of over 100 New York City-based architecture and engineering firms. It was started in the spring, specifically to tackle the challenges of COVID. And they typically help nonprofits and small businesses with pro bono help, and they can get quite involved in servicing them. Another organization is called the Design Corps, which a number of the people on this webinar helped to create. It's also a platform for architects and engineers to offer services a little bit more on a limited basis. And it's currently primarily to restaurants, but we're looking to expand that soon. And that was founded by New York City EDC, the AIA New York, and the Design Advocates. So here are a list of links and resources. These will all be sent to you. In particular, I'd like to mention the Manual of Physical Distancing, which came out of Princeton, which is a lot of where we started with understanding how to tackle these issues. There are a lot of fantastic articles, which you can read here about the workplace, the changes to the workplace, working from home. And most importantly, I just want to thank all of our presenters and our contributors. We could not have done this. This is really a community effort of the design community coming together to try to help small businesses. So thank you so much for all of the work that you've done. I'd also like to thank the American Institute of Architects, the New York chapter, for their help and support, particularly Benjamin Prosky and Suzanne Mex. And I'd also like to thank the Unified Task Force at the AIA, which is led by Ilya. And we are essentially operating under the umbrella of the task force. And this is the group that has really put all the time and effort into creating this webinar. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for the 6 months of hard work that you put into this. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the New York City Department of Small Business Services for hosting us today, and also the support of the New York City Economic Development Corporation, as well as my classmates from the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Business Program who helped instigate and provoke this whole thing. So thank you for all of that. And finally, I just want to thank our peer reviewers. We had industry professionals review the work that we're showing you today to make sure that we are showing everything properly. So with that, we can open this up to questions. While we wait for that to come in, I've got a couple of things that I'd like to ask. Let's start with Amy. We've talked a lot today about company culture and using it to help guide the decisions and which strategies to use. And I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about understanding the culture that's in your company.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. When it comes to a question of culture, it's really a simple question of people and community. Understanding the context of your culture is probably the core of the question, and you shouldn't do that alone. What firm leaders typically think about their culture is often not what's experienced by the employee, and I think that's something we really need to take to heart and start to co-create an experience that can actually become a shared reality. So you can lay the groundwork for those conversations by really building trust and empathy with your team. You can lead by example, expand your own vulnerability, and start to investigate how maybe you can start to promote respect, optimism, sharing, and engagement a little bit stronger. It's proven that positive culture leads to increased productivity and increased revenue. So all of this, all of the culture question comes down to ROI. And these are measured quantitatively. So people equal profit, but don't forget that people are people.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Amy. I'd like to ask Ilya, who is really an expert in disaster recovery, and he's worked on a number of different disasters. And how would you compare this pandemic with the many other crises that you have worked on and dealt with?
Oh, thanks, Andre. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, we are in a very unique position, more often than not, as a second responder, and the expertise that myself and a lot of colleagues bring to conditions of disaster. It's usually in the aftermath of disaster. We'll often watch the disaster unfold, usually from a distance, rather than experiencing it firsthand, and then put into play a lot of the elements that we are trained to bring forward in terms of coordination, materials, you name it. In this case, we are all experiencing the disaster together, and it's an ongoing disaster. We are not in the aftermath. We are in the after. We're experiencing those effects currently. So what I like to think about this idea that we are at an inflection point. We are in live adaptation mode, not only as design professionals, but as communities. And the only way we're going to thrive through this disaster is to truly embrace the fact we can't go back to the way it was, and really understand that this is a changing landscape until we come out to the other side, and how we thrive through this and continue to respond. Even after 9 months of this, and it'll be 10 months, 12 months, 13, 14 months, we have to continue to put effort into this. And that's why I'm so grateful that we have partners with the city, with the state, with all of you as my colleagues, to really continue to go through this. It takes a lot of hands. So thanks for the question. I think there's a big difference, but I think we can tackle this. We'll continue to keep working.
Okay, thank you, Ilya. And can SBS provide, like, how can they help small businesses maybe understand what they have to do with the different requirements, compliance? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. This is Michael Fong from SBS. Just want to highlight that we have one of the teams under SBS, which is compliance advisors. We provide one-on-one consultation for small businesses, and this has been launched since 2016. We've been providing one-on-one compliance support to the business owners, and which saving them millions of dollars of fines. And this is a free resource to small businesses. And our compliance advisor also speaks multiple languages in terms of Chinese, Russian, and Haitian Creole. So if any one of you has questions, you can reach out to me. I have left my contact information through the chat. So feel free to check out for more information.
Thank you very much, Michael. Cam, so you had mentioned the use of portable HEPA filters and humidification. Is there any rule of thumb or anything in terms of if we're going to buy them for our office, what's needed? How many?
Exactly, especially for the smaller offices and small businesses. So the way these units are rated, they're rated based on cubic feet per minute of air that they handle. So if you actually go to a hardware store, or if you go online, you want to order one, you're going to see the ratings, and you're going to see a chart that says so many square footage, so many CFM. So based on the space you have, you should pick that. But the way they do that, and the way they actually calculate that cubic feet per minute, is that they take the volume of the space, that is the length times the width times the height of the space that you're going to be using this equipment in. That becomes the volume, obviously. And then you multiply that by the air change per hour that you desire. That goes anywhere from minimum of 2 to about 6. And if you divide that by 60, so it becomes volume times the air change divided by 60, that gives you the CFM that you need for that particular space. Now, these equipment are becoming better, less quiet. They don't take as much space as they used to. And they could also be a great supplement to the existing equipment if there is any. If there is none, obviously this would be a measure by itself. But if there is other air handlers, air conditioners, even the through the window unit, these units with HEPA filtrations would be another good supplement to the space.
Okay, thank you, Cam. So I think with that, let's wrap up. Again, thank you to everyone for participating. Thank you for watching, and thank you to SBS for hosting us. So I hope you all have a good evening, and thank you again. Good night.